Now, when it comes to our end stations, they can use EUI 64, but nowadays they are not using EUI 64 by default. So you can enable this feature on your end stations, but with, for example, Windows, there's a random generator for the interface ID now. And here's the reason why they've done that. It's because you could easily track a device throughout the entire world through the EUI 64 addressing process. Why is that? Because the MAC address is being utilized. Right? So this MAC address is tied to your particular device. And as a result of it, when you have the EUI 64 IPv6 address being utilized, you can take out the FFFE, flip the bit, and now you have the MAC address of the device, which means that we can keep track of you. If you connect to the internet in Toronto, we would know that based on your MAC address. If you connected to the internet then in LA, we would know that based on your MAC address. If you then connected to the internet in Australia, we would know that just based on your MAC address. So it's really easy to track you throughout the world. So this is a privacy concern. So as a result of that, operating systems out there now are just randomly generating the interface portion. They're not even following this. But it's okay with our routers because our routers are stationary. And with our routers, we're typically not going to have them connected to the internet anyways, or sourcing packets to the internet anyways. So this is not a privacy concern for us and our routers, but it's definitely a privacy concern for our mobile phones, smartphones, and tablets, laptops, as we take them with us throughout the world. So to ensure that we have privacy with IPv6 addressing, there's a random generator that is used. So that brings me to the concept of stateless address auto configuration. I could, on a router, tell my router, hey, automatically configure your own address. The problem with that is that another router has to be on that same local area network with an address and telling the other router what to use, because stateless address auto configuration relies on what is known as router advertisements. So we have a router that sends out a router advertisement and says, hey, I'm 2001, or I'm connected to 2001 0db8 01:/64. So I hand that out, and any device in that local area network off my interface that is configured for stateless auto configuration says, oh, great. So I'm going to join that exact same network because I hear you out there, which means that you can be my default gateway because you are a router. So I'm going to automatically join 2001 0db8 01/64, and then I'm going to auto-generate my interface portion. If it supports EUI 64, it can be used. If it supports the random generator, it's going to be used. So even though the device hasn't been configured manually by an administrator, automatically with IPv6, you turn on a device, it hears a router advertisement, it can automatically configure its interfaces. We're not going to do that with our routers, though, meaning we're not going to allow our routers to auto-configure themselves, because if that router is the only router connected to that local area network, well, it needs somebody to tell it its information, but nobody's there. So it doesn't make sense to do it on the router interfaces. But it is an option you have if you really wanted to on a router, where you have routers connected to other routers. You could have one router set up with a static address, as we see here, and then everybody else can auto-configure based on that address. You could do that. And then we also have our trusty DHCP service for IPv6 as well. So by default, in the real world on local area networks, your clients are by default set up for this right here. That's right. So they're waiting for router advertisements. If they don't get a router advertisement because you shut that feature off on your router, then they are going to go look for a DHCP for IPv6 server. That's right. So they are attempting by default to use stateless auto configuration. And then they'll jump to DHCP if that doesn't work. Now, what if stateless auto configuration does work? Well, what we have the ability to do is tell the clients to get additional information on top of what you already have, your IP address, your default gateway, your prefix length, your DNS. So those are the primary items we can hand out with stateless address auto configuration through router advertisements. So we can hand out the IP address, or pardon me, the prefix. So 2001 example, 2001 DB801:/64 is the network. Client auto configures itself. But since it received that information from me, the router, it can use me as the default gateway now. So it's going to use my link local address as its default gateway. We can also hand out DNS information now in that as well. So what else is missing? Well, from a basic connectivity standpoint to the internet, nothing else is missing. But if you're handing out If there's devices on that link that need extra special information like options such as TFTP server options or wireless LAN controller options, then we're going to have to tell them to contact the DHCP server to get the other information that they need. So you can either use a combination of the two or just go straight out with DHCP for IPv6, or for the majority of clients that only need internet connectivity, then stateless auto configuration will work perfectly fine. So think about it from the standpoint of users with mobile devices that are going all over the place throughout the world, and they connect to all these different hotspots. Do we really need a DHCP-v6 server set up in all those different hotspots to hand out addresses? No, we don't, because with stateless address auto configuration, you just need the router to tell that mobile device, here's your address, here's the addressing information, go ahead and configure yourself based on that. Use me as your default gateway, and here's a DNS server. All right, we're done. Now we can just go ahead and connect to the internet as we need to. So unless you need the extra special features, you don't really need a DHCP server for the majority of basic internet connectivity throughout the world. So it's really nice to see that as an auto configuration feature, making it easy to deploy IPv6 networks relatively quickly in various locations.